certain one this year, it's between $100,000 and $150,000 each. So it's not a great deal of money, but it is substantial.
And would that be a repayable contribution?
No, that's a non-repayable contribution.
Super.
There's several people, so rather than identify you all, you can take a mic and start speaking. You have the floor.
All right. Free for all.
I was curious by the fact that you use the term tenants of the incubators, not owners of the incubators. And I would think that there'd be a lot more trust and a lot more commitment to joining an incubator if you did have an ownership right to what was happening. And I think it's something I would like for you to comment on and maybe give an example of why they wanted to be tenants and not owners.
Yeah, I think there are different models to start. If you look at the literature in incubation, there's several different ways that it can happen. One is what you suggest is structuring it like a cooperative, right? Where everyone takes a stake and they have that a higher elevated level of shared fate. The ones that we're looking at actually are founded by 1, 2, 3 small subset of individuals. They own it, but then they lease out spaces. So the one in Toronto that, for example, that we studied, leases out everything from an office to a desk to a certain amount of hours per week. You know, all different types of models, so it actually fits the needs of the people that come in. But I think you're right, that there probably would be perhaps a different level of commitment in a cooperative type of model.
Please speak up then. I see where you go.
Sorry, we can't move the mic over far enough to. So, Tina, the contribution that diversity makes to this whole process has come up several times. And I can see how you can manufacture interaction and all those kinds of things through, but how do you manufacture diversity in a rural setting?
So I think it's about making sure then that the people you place in the incubator, there is some type of selection. So in an urban context, one of the things that we've seen in Toronto is that they have an elaborate selection process before people are brought into the incubator, and they see that they have complementary skills or that they bring something different. So we have for-profit, non-profit, consultants, lots of different sectors represented under one roof. And I think that that's a strategy that perhaps in rural incubation that might need to be looked at seriously as well, because one of the things we're seeing in some of the incubators is that there's actually a lot of like-mindedness being brought into the incubators. And that's a benefit early on, but perhaps as time goes on, there's going to need to be more of a deliberate strategy to inject that diversity, because we all know that trust is really important because it leads to cohesion, but then too much cohesion leads to things like groupthink and lack of innovation and lots of other problems. And so almost deliberately manufacturing the diversity and bringing that. But you can't just have trust and you just can't have diversity either. What you're going to need, though, is that third mechanism, that mechanism of brokerage or convening, where you actually start to bring people together in a very deliberate way as well. Because that frequent interaction is what's going to lead to the good ideas coming out of there.
May I speak loudly? You mentioned about not a lot of credible research for the business incubation industry.
Yeah, it's very...
Are you aware of the Canadian Association of Business Incubators?
Yes, yes.
Are you aware of the National Association of Business Incubators?
Yes.
So
and so I should rephrase that and say, from the world that I come from on organization theory, we don't have a lot of insights in this. So this is where I really, really struggle. And so I'm learning a lot of new literature, but I'm finding it very hard. By credible, I mean that the samples are sometimes highly idiosyncratic. Sometimes also what happens, there's mixed findings on the successes. And so it's very hard to take studies and then try to say, okay, what are the clear learnings? So if I was telling somebody today that wished to start an incubator, were there some 4 or 5 things that you have to do? I can't find that, because I find so much disagreement amongst the literature. And in some ways, maybe that's great because there's opportunity. But on the other hand, it's very, very tough. And so we scoured the literature on sort of urban incubation, which most of it's been done in biotech, high-tech sectors, and looking at research parks and things like that. And we found it very, very hard to figure out what it is we could take to the rural incubation context. But I appreciate very, very much. Credible's probably not the right way. Applicable to our context is probably a better.
No, and thank you for that. But I would highly recommend anyone that wants to know more about successful business incubators to get in touch with those organizations, especially the Canadian one. They just finished a yearly conference. They've been incorporated for over 10 years and are amassing new data and a lot of best practices, many of which are in rural areas.
So that would be terrific. Thank you.
Okay, there were several hands in that area. Just anyone who wishes to speak.
I have a question about when you put different people together in a room or in a building, and they interact from a business perspective, and one person ignites thinking for another person. Who owns that proprietary right? Like that ownership? Something's been created. It belongs to somebody. How do you define the boundaries in such a situation?
Yeah. Truthfully, I don't know how they would do that. In the one in Toronto that we've studied, it's really about a race to market, right? So who gets to the market first? And that's my honest answer. Somebody here who's maybe studied intellectual property issues within an incubation context may have more ideas, or Kelly, I know you've studied some of that work as well, but it's tough, yeah.
Just to add to that, we always say, for those who don't know me, I'm Kelly Packlin, and I'm also on the faculty at the business school, and I teach entrepreneurship and do some research in this area. And one of the things is really looking at, there's a big difference, we always say, between having that idea and actually executing upon it. And so I think those, and all the time in the classroom when I was talking, people say, oh, you know, I don't want to talk about my idea, I don't want to talk about my idea. And we find that those cases where some sort of proprietary or intellectual are so rare that the benefits of these interactions and crossovers far exceed those very few, probably publicized, and that's why people are, aware of them, but very few cases where someone else truly steals another person's idea. So it tends to work out a lot better than people's sort of worst case scenario. There's a few and far between.
And just to build on that, I think look at all the lovely papers that have been presented so far this morning. We share so much overlap and ideas and things, and I think because you get a lot of people together in a room that are passionate about a particular space, good stuff is going to start coming out. And so that's what I think that happens in incubators and other contexts as well, is that we all stand on the shoulders of giants in some ways. Ideas have come, and then we capture them in different ways. Yeah.
John?
You mentioned that incubators have a mixed success rate. Do you have any specifics, like what percentage of new incubators last 5 years or 10 years?
Yeah, so we do have some insights in our report that's on your flash drive, but we also have access to lots of other research that's been done on incubator success, so I'd be happy to talk with you maybe during the break on that. That'd be great.
Okay, let's just take a final question. And then I know you're standing between us and lunch, but we'll keep it brief. Please, you get the last question.
Yeah, one of the issues that come up a couple of times this morning is a strategy based upon planting many seeds versus choosing to focus. I think Kevin described it in his presentation as a shotgun approach. Provide as many opportunities as we can, and maybe something will catch. And when I hear the idea of incubation, it sounds a lot more focused to me. Although you've talked about the importance of having some diversity within an incubator, there has to be some commonality, it seems to me, on the kind of industry that's being supported within an incubator. And so, how do you come down on that overall? If you're recommending a development strategy for a rural area, and an incubator is going to be part of that strategy, to what extent should that creative industry focus be a very broad one or a very narrow one?
Yeah, so I think you touched on it in asking the question at the very beginning, because I think it depends on the type of problem that you're hoping to solve. So for someone like me to study social innovation and social entrepreneurship, it's usually driven by the social needs, and those come up from a bubble up from local communities. But I think if one was to look at something and say, okay, renewable energy, and that's, we're going to take a focused approach in renewable energy, we're going to have a more broad-based incubator that's large. Like I look at a place like Santa Fe Institute, just brings a lot of smart people together and allows them to hang out. You have mathematical, physicists with people who study the structure of RNA, and they come under one roof, and all of a sudden these big ideas start to pop out. Linus Pauling said a long time ago, how do you get a great idea? Well, you need to have a lot of ideas. And I think that's what we're trying to explore in this study, is to say, what is that critical mass, and at what point do you need maximizing diversity, and at what point might you maximize trust? And so for certain types of research problems, you actually may want to maximize the trust and the cohesion. And for other types of research problems or contexts, you may want to maximize diversity. I don't think right now, I can confidently say that there's one approach that must be taken in rural incubation. I think it really has to depend on the social need or the problem that you're trying to solve. I'm not trying to cop out, but I'm sort of saying there isn't sort of a clear-cut response to that. It's a very good question, though. Very, very good question, and one that I'm sure that, especially for policy folks, it's a really big question. Do we go do the deep dive, or do we spread our resources out and see how it works?
Well, let's thank Tino, please.